The year was 2055, a time when the world had been reshaped by technological marvels. Yet the shadows of history still lingered in forgotten corners. The old European castle, now a cutting-edge research facility, stood as a testament to the marriage of past and present. Despite the gleaming labs and advanced equipment above, the castle's ancient stone walls whispered of a darker time, when horrors roamed free and unspeakable deeds were committed within its halls. Dr. Elizabeth Carter, an esteemed historian and cryptid researcher, had spent years chasing down myths and legends, her work often dismissed as fringe by her more conventional colleagues. But she had always believed that within every myth lay a kernel of truth, a sliver of reality hidden beneath layers of time and embellishment. And now, as she navigated the cold, narrow corridors deep beneath the castle, she felt that she was on the brink of uncovering something extraordinary. The castle had been the subject of countless stories over the centuries, rumors of dark rituals, of disappearances, of an evil that had once taken root here and never truly left. While the world above had moved on, Elizabeth knew that the past had a way of clinging to places like this, of seeping into the very stone and soil, waiting to be unearthed by those daring enough to look. Elizabeth's breath caught as she approached a heavily sealed vault deep in the castle's underbelly. Unlike the modern installations that had taken over the upper levels, this room had remained untouched, its secrets locked away behind layers of security. She had spent days combing through old blueprints and forgotten documents to find it, piecing together clues that had led her here, to a place where the past had been entombed. With practiced precision, she bypassed the vault's security mechanisms, her fingers deftly working through the layers of locks and codes that had kept it sealed for centuries. As the final lock clicked open, the heavy door creaked slowly inward, revealing a dark, musty room beyond. Elizabeth hesitated at the threshold, a sense of foreboding washing over her. But she pushed it aside and stepped into the vault. The air was thick with the scent of decay and old paper, and dust motes floated lazily in the beam of her flashlight. The room was small, cramped, lined with shelves that bowed under the weight of ancient artifacts and crumbling tomes. Each item had been meticulously preserved, untouched by time or modern hands. But it was the object at the center of the room that drew Elizabeth's eye. Resting on a pedestal of carved stone was a weathered, leather-bound book. It was smaller than she had expected, yet it seemed to dominate the space around it, as if the room itself revolved around this singular item. The leather was dark, cracked with age, yet still supple to the touch. As she approached, the air grew colder, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Something within the book was aware of her presence. Her fingers brushed against the cover, tracing the outline of a strange symbol embossed on the leather. It was a design she didn't recognize, yet it stirred something deep within her, a sense of familiarity that she couldn't place. The symbol seemed to pulse beneath her fingers, as if the book itself was alive, reacting to her touch. With a deep breath, Elizabeth opened the diary. The pages were brittle, yellowed with age, yet the ink remained vibrant, the handwriting precise and elegant. It was as though the words had been written only yesterday, preserved in some way that defied explanation. As she began to read, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The air grew colder still, the shadows deepening as if drawn toward her. Her hands trembled, the weight of the moment pressing down on her as she realized the significance of what she had found. This was no ordinary book. It was a relic of a time when the world was darker, more dangerous, a time when creatures of the night held sway over the living. The first entry was dated centuries ago, in a language Elizabeth could barely decipher. But as she scanned the text, she was pulled deeper into the mind of the one who had penned these words, the world around her fading away, until all that remained were the thoughts and memories of an ancient, powerful being. The night was thick with the scent of death. I could feel it in the air, a palpable force that clung to the land like a shroud. The village ahead, nestled in the shadow of a heavily fortified castle, pulsed with life. Foolish, fragile life that had no idea of the darkness that was about to descend upon it. I could sense them all. The mortals huddled in their homes, the beasts prowling the forests, the undead lurking in the graveyards. They thought themselves safe, protected by stone walls and chains of dark magic. how misguided they were. As I approached the village, I allowed the shadows to cloak me, my presence a mere whisper on the wind. The night had always been my ally, the darkness my home, and it welcomed me now as it had for centuries. I could hear the distant howls of werewolves, the low groans of the undead, and the frantic murmurs of the living. They had no idea that their end was near. This village was different from the others I had raised in my path. It reeked of desperation. The mortals here had turned to ancient and forbidden practices to bind the creatures of the night to their will, believing they could harness the power of darkness for their own protection. They had enslaved werewolves, forced the undead into servitude, and chained them with crude magics. It was laughable, really, these pitiful beings thinking they could control forces far beyond their comprehension. I had no pity for them. Their foolishness only served to amuse me, and I relished the opportunity to show them the futility of their efforts. The first of their guardians appeared as I entered the village, a hulking werewolf, its fur bristling with a wild, untamed power. Its eyes glowed with a feral light, but beneath that was a spark of fear. The beast was bound by a collar of iron, etched with runes that crackled with dark energy. It snarled as it caught my scent, recognizing the predator that had come for it. I stood my ground, a smirk curling on my lips as the werewolf charged, its massive claws tearing up the earth beneath it. It thought it could overpower me with sheer brute strength, but it knew nothing of true power. I moved with the speed of a shadow, sidestepping its lunge with effortless grace. As it barreled past me, I reached out and snapped the chain that bound it with a flick of my wrist. The runes on the collar fizzled and died, the dark magic dissipating into the air like smoke. The werewolf skidded to a halt, its eyes wide with confusion as it realized it was no longer bound. It turned to face me, its lips pulled back in a snarl, but I could see the hesitation in its gaze. It knew, on some primal level, that it stood no chance against me. "Run," I told it, my voice a low, commanding growl. "Run, and I might let you live." The beast hesitated for a moment longer, then turned and fled into the darkness, its howls echoing through the night. I let it go. There would be time enough to hunt it down later, when I had dealt with the rest of this pitiful village. The other creatures were not so fortunate. I moved through the village like a wraith, my every step deliberate, my every movement calculated. The undead that staggered towards me, driven by the twisted magics that animated them, were dispatched with swift, brutal efficiency. Their bodies crumbled to dust as I tore through them, their souls released from the torment of their existence. The mortals who tried to stand against me, wielding their makeshift weapons and crude spells, met a similarly swift end. I took no pleasure in their deaths. They were simply obstacles to be removed, distractions from the true prize that lay ahead. The castle loomed over the village, its stone walls towering high above, a fortress built to withstand the mightiest of sieges. The mortals within believed they were safe, that their walls and their enslaved creatures would protect them from the horrors of the night. They were wrong. As I approached the castle, the gates swung open, and from within, the strongest of the creatures they had bound were unleashed. A pack of werewolves, larger and more ferocious than any I had encountered before, emerged from the darkness, their eyes glowing with a savage hunger. Behind them, the undead knights, clad in ancient armor, their swords crackling with dark energy, marched in formation. At their head, a sorcerer, draped in robes of deep crimson, his hands crackling with arcane power, stepped forward, his eyes fixed on me with a mixture of fear and determination. They had gathered their forces for a final desperate stand. It was almost admirable in a way, the lengths to which mortals would go to protect their lives, their homes, their loved ones. But admiration would not spare them from my wrath. I stood before them, my eyes glowing with an inner fire, my body thrumming with the power that surged through my veins. I could feel the darkness within me, a force older than time itself, rising to the surface, ready to be unleashed. "Is this all you have?" I called out, my voice carrying through the night. "Is this the best you can muster to stand against me?" The sorcerer snarled, his hands moving in a complex pattern as he began to weave a spell. The werewolves tensed, ready to strike, and the undead knights raised their swords in unison. I waited, my gaze locked on the sorcerer, watching as the magic took shape in the air before him, And then, just as the spell was about to be unleashed, I struck. The shadows around me coiled and writhed, responding to my command. They surged forward, enveloping the sorcerer and his creatures in a swirling vortex of darkness. The werewolves howled in pain as the shadows tore at their flesh, ripping them apart from within. The undead knights faltered, their swords falling from their hands as the dark magic that bound them was consumed by the shadows. The sorcerer screamed, his spell unraveling as the darkness devoured him, leaving nothing but a withered husk in its wake. The castle stood as the last bastion of resistance, its walls towering over the surrounding ruins of the village I had claimed. The fires still burned in the distance, the scent of smoke and blood thick in the air. The villagers who had not fled now huddled within the castle's stone walls, praying to whatever gods they believed in for salvation. But I knew, as did they, that no gods would come to their aid. They had only me to face now, and I was unstoppable. I walked through the gates, the once imposing doors now lying shattered behind me. The great hall was dimly lit, the flickering torches casting long shadows that danced across the cold stone walls. The air was heavy with the scent of fear, of desperation, and of something far darker. Dark magic, clinging to the very stones, woven into the fabric of the castle itself. They had tried to stop me before, with their beasts and their spells. But they had all fallen. Now, they had gathered the last of their strength for one final stand. I could hear the hurried footsteps of the warriors, and the murmurs of the sorcerers as they prepared their defenses, their whispers echoing through the vast hallways. The first wave came at me with all the fury they could muster. The warriors, clad in armor that clanked with every movement, charged forward with swords raised high. Their faces were set in grim determination, their eyes betraying the fear they tried so hard to suppress. The sorcerers, standing behind them, chanted incantations, their hands weaving intricate patterns in the air as they summoned the dark magic that had been their only defense. I watched them approach, my expression one of cold detachment. They were nothing more than insects, scrambling in the face of an oncoming storm. I could feel the power within me, ancient and unyielding, coursing through my veins, ready to be unleashed. The first warrior reached me, his sword swinging down with all the strength he could muster. I caught the blade in my hand, the steel biting into my flesh, but I felt no pain. I twisted the sword from his grip and drove it through his chest, the blade sliding effortlessly through his armor. His eyes widened in shock as he crumpled to the ground, his life extinguished in an instant. The others followed, but they met the same fate. I moved through them like a shadow, my movements fluid and precise. Their swords could not touch me, their shields could not protect them. One by one they fell, their blood staining the cold stone floor, their screams echoing through the halls. The sorcerers were next. They unleashed their spells, dark tendrils of magic snaking through the air, seeking to ensnare me, to bind me, to destroy me. But I had faced such magic before, and it held no power over me. I raised my hand, and the shadows responded, twisting and coiling around the sorcerers, consuming their spells before they could reach me. They screamed as the darkness enveloped them, their bodies withering and crumbling to dust, their souls lost to the void. And then, from the depths of the castle, the final challenger emerged. He was an undead knight, clad in ancient armor that bore the marks of countless battles. His eyes glowed with an unnatural light, a deep, crimson hue that reflected the darkness within him. He was bound to the castle's lord, a creature of immense strength and resolve, one who had not yet tasted fear. The knight approached slowly, his every step measured, his sword held low but ready. There was no hesitation in his movements, no faltering in his gaze. He was not like the others. He was no mere pawn in this game of survival. He was a warrior, bound by honor even in death, and I could respect that. As he drew near, I felt a flicker of something akin to anticipation. This would not be a slaughter. This would be a fight, a true test of strength. I inclined my head slightly, acknowledging the knight's resolve before I raised my hand, summoning the darkness to me. The knight did not wait. He surged forward, his sword arcing through the air with the force of a hurricane. I met him with a blade of shadow, the darkness solidifying into a weapon in my grasp. The clash of steel and shadow rang through the hall. The the force of the impact shaking the very walls. The battle was fierce, each of us moving with a speed and precision that no mortal could hope to match. The knight's blows were powerful, each strike aimed with deadly intent, but I met them all, deflecting, countering, driving him back step by step. He was strong, stronger than any I had faced before, but strength alone would not be enough. The knight fought with a grim determination, his every movement a testament to the life he had once lived. But I could see the cracks in his resolve, the way his movements began to slow, the way his strikes became less precise. He was faltering, the dark magic that animated him beginning to wane. I pressed the attack, driving him back further and further, until finally, with a swift and decisive strike, I shattered his sword and plunged my blade into his chest. The knight staggered, his crimson eyes flickering as the darkness consumed him. He fell to his knees, his armor clattering against the stone floor, and looked up at me, a final spark of defiance in his gaze. "Well fought," I said, my voice cold but respectful. "But this is the end." With a final twist of the blade, I severed the last ties that bound him to this world. The light in his eyes faded, and he crumpled to the ground, his body nothing more than a lifeless husk. I approached the castle gates, my steps slow and deliberate. The doors creaked open before me, and I stepped into the great hall, where the lord of the castle waited, his face pale with fear. "Please," he begged, falling to his knees before me. "Spare me. I will give you anything you desire." I looked down at him, my expression cold and unfeeling. He was nothing to me, just another mortal who had thought he could defy the darkness. But I had no interest in his life, his wealth, or his power. There was only one thing I desired. "Your blood will suffice," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. With a swift motion, I grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off the ground. His eyes widened in terror as he struggled in my grasp, but it was futile. I sank my teeth into his neck with such ferocity that his head nearly separated from his shoulders. I could feel the life draining from him, his blood flowing into me, nourishing the darkness within. When it was over, I dropped his lifeless body to the ground and wiped the blood from my lips. The castle was mine now, as was the village, and all the creatures that had once called it home. They were nothing to me, just pawns in a game that only I could win. I turned and walked out of the castle, the night air cool against my skin. The village lay in ruins behind me, most its people dead or scattered, some of its creatures destroyed. But I felt no remorse, no regret. This was the way of the world, the way it had always been, and the way it would always be. I am Lord Valen, the bringer of death, the master of darkness, and I will stop at nothing to claim what is mine.